Hello everyone, this is Valerio, and I welcome you to the first episode of Milk Cookies Segfolds. And this is what I'd like to be my very own screencasting series. In this episode, I will be demonstrating a very interesting and useful tool called simply Emmet. Emmet is a tool which can make you significantly more productive in writing HTML, XML, and CSS codes. Now what this means is that it is mostly going to be useful to web developers, not just web developers. For example, if you're a Java developer working with a lot of XML code, you can find this very useful as well, but mainly web developers are those that are targeted. And this is mainly, I think, because it reuses concepts which are known and used by web developers, such as, for example, CSS selectors. So it's very easy to learn in that context. Anyway, if you haven't heard of Emmet and you're working somehow with any web-related technologies, this screencast is definitely for you. So let's get to the point. The main idea in Emmet is that you write a so-called abbreviation, which is basically a simple, concise snippet of code, naturally composed of some HTML tag names and optionally some CSS selectors. And then you expand this abbreviation into what is to be your final code using the tab key, which by the way is the first and most used key binding in Emmet. Now let's see how that looks. Using this very simple HTML structure we've had since the beginning of the screencast in front of us, let's just say I want to add a div element. Div, press tab, and there it goes. It expands to a proper HTML tag. Now this isn't very spectacular, and many editors already provide this by default. But let's go much further. Undo, and let's say inside this div element I want an unordered list, just for example's sake. Inside this list I want a single list item for now. Press tab, and this happens. Pretty nice. Let's go forward. Let's see, I want the div element to have an ID name of header, my list to have a class, a CSS class of menu, and my list item to have a class of entry. Press tab now, and it expands to this. Pretty nice. Let's see how I can make this even more complex. What if I don't want just one list item? I want, let's say, 7. I use the multiplying operator, which intuitively enough is the asterisk, exposed by Emmet, times 7, press enter, and this happens. Again, very nice. But let's make this even more interesting. Let's say I want each of these list items to have a distinct HTML ID. Enter an ID for them. Let's say item. If I press tab, right now it does exactly what I did before with the div header ID, and I want to make those IDs distinct because that's how I'm going to make them useful. Undo and go to the ID, and now I can use the dollar symbol, which is actually a placeholder for the iteration count. It's a automatically incremented number which grows with each iteration. If I press tab now, this is what happens. Very nice. One note here, I can use the dollar sign at any point in class, CSS class names, even in tag names, and it'll work as expected. Basically, it creates that incrementation number everywhere it's being put. Very nice. Let's go back. Okay, so let's say I want to, inside each of these list items, to place an anchor tag, a simple hyperlink. This anchor tag should have a text of page and the iteration count. As you can see, I placed the text inside brackets, and this is what happens. Again, very nice. But how do I generate an href, an automatically generated href for these anchor tags? I use the custom attribute syntax, which you will recognize from CSS selectors. So href equals, let's say, page incrementation count, iteration count, HTML. Press tab, and this is what happens. Very nice. Let's say I want to place in each of the list items an extra element, a span. Do this, and here's what it does. In each list item, it placed the original anchor tag, and using the plus operator, it generated a sibling to the anchor tag, which is basically the span. And it multiplied that for each of the list items. But let's say I don't want to do this. I want the span to be the sibling of the list itself. So basically it should be the last child of the div with the ID of header. How do I do this? I want to surround basically my list with parentheses. Now this basically makes sense, I guess, to any developer. Press tab, and this is what happens. So basically you have scope. Using parentheses, you can control the scope where your operators work. So in just a few minutes, I've shown you just how many things you can do with Emmet, and just a few simple keystrokes. This is very, very flexible, and you can write abbreviations as complex as you might think of. Now, another thing to note here is that we're not bound to using HTML tag names. If I don't want to use divs or spans or ULs or anchor tags or all that, I can just use anything. For example, let's say I want to have my own special kind of markup in which I have a template element containing 5 partials, right? Each of them containing 2 boxes, right? Very nice. I press tab, and exactly what I should expect, what I expect is what happens. Another thing to note here, very nice, is that Emmet detects the endpoints in my abbreviation, and when it generates the code, when I press tab and expands this abbreviation into pure code, it remembers those places where it would make sense for me to go and write some more code, to edit some more. And it provides a tab-stop navigation for me to navigate between all those points. So by pressing tab or shift tab successively, I can navigate between all those points, which obviously can be more than just, the contents of the box elements right here. It depends on your abbreviation. So all this is very, very nice. However, it doesn't work with real code as far as I've shown you so far. But you probably have real project, real code, which you need to work using Emmet. So what do you do if you have, for example, this heading? And this is just an example. Obviously, you will probably have more complex pieces of code. But just for demonstrating this, I think this will do. So I want to have this heading integrated inside an abbreviation. So basically write an abbreviation that when expanded should wrap this code which I've selected. How do I do this? Well, I select my piece of code which I want to work with. I press the wrap using abbreviation key combination, which it happens that in my editor is Control-Shift-G. As a side note, I'm using Sublime Text on Linux, on Ubuntu Linux. I'm going to talk about editors at the end of the screencast a bit. So Control-Shift-G puts me in wrapping mode. What this does is, as you can see at the base of the window, I have an input field in which I can write my abbreviation, and that abbreviation is automatically and in real time rendered into my code. So let's say I don't want a div. What's that div doing there? No, I don't want a div. Let's say I want, again, a template. Something I made up, doesn't matter. And inside that template I want a div. And you can see it generates the abbreviation, and inside the elements, at the very last endpoint, it inserts my selection. But let's just say I don't want a single div, I want 3 divs. There you go. One thing to remember, my selection is always placed in the last generated element. This is, again, very nice. When I'm happy with the result, I just press enter and things go solid. Great. But let's say I want something more. Let's say I have a list of files, something like index.html, something like readme md, something like changelog, maybe a docs folder, maybe a lib folder, and so on. That's fine. Let's say I want to work with all of these items and essentially apply an abbreviation for each one of these lines. Maybe, let's say for now, I want to make hyperlinks out of all of these. So essentially what I do is select all the lines, again going to wrapping mode, Control-Shift-G in my editor. I don't want to use a div, I want to use a anchor tag, of course. I'm trying to make these hyperlinks. But here's the interesting part. There's a way of telling Emmet that I want these abbreviation which I'm writing down in the input field below to be applied to each of the lines in my selection. And the way I do this is again using the multiplications operator, the asterisk, but in a special way, because I just don't specify a value. I don't tell it how many times it should multiply my abbreviation. So I just say asterisk, and Emmet automatically understands that I'm trying to apply this abbreviation to each of my lines. Again, all the things I mentioned before are still applicable here. So for example, I want my anchor tags to have files classes, maybe an ID of file underscore, the iteration count, and all of those things. Everything works. Everything works, and basically you can combine all of these things any way you want. And obviously that's where Emmet's power comes from. Now, another very interesting thing is that Emmet also provides a similar functionality for CSS files. Now, I'm not going to go too much into detail on CSS because I don't want to bombard you with too much information in one screencast, but just for the sake of it, let's see how it looks in CSS mode. Let's say I have a very simple CSS file, for example, just one class, a box class, a simple class, and I want to provide this class with a certain characteristic. I want to tell it that it has a margin of 10 pixels. And it's not in any way more complicated than this. M10 tab. What if I want to say, okay, I don't want 10 pixels all around, I just want 10 pixels for top and bottom and 5 pixels for left and right? No problem. Or maybe full specification. No problem. What if I want a color, something like a text color of almost dark, almost black? No problem. Or maybe some really nice orangey reddy thingy color. Sorry. There you go. So what it does is essentially generate your code based on many CSS based snippets. You will learn these as you go along, step by step. You shouldn't try to assimilate them all at once. Try to familiarize yourself with this, and I encourage you to read the Emmet documentation. This is available at the Emmet website, which is, I'm going to write it here so that you can look at it and memorize it visually. http emmet.io. They have a very well written documentation. They have interactive examples. I encourage you to see them. And of course, you have to understand that what I've shown you here is a simple set of facilities. Emmet can do much more than this. My goal here was to whet your appetite, let's say, because if you're interested and if you start using it, you're going to find many more things, many more useful things. For example, if you have, just for example, let's say I have an anchor tag, or maybe 10 anchor tags, right? Simple enough. And all these have IDs, item, as I've shown you, using that iteration count, make them distinct. Very nice. However, what if I want those iteration numbers to start from 5? I use the modifier at 5. Press tab, and there it goes. There are others as well. For example, what if I want to zero pad my IDs? I can use, okay, I want this iteration count here to be padded on 3 digits. No problem. There you go. I can use as many digits as I want. Just multiply the symbol. No problem. Again, there are many such things in Emmet. And slowly but surely, you should become familiarized with them and start using them. Now, most time, you will not, or at least you should not, try to write complex, deeply nested abbreviations. These are only rarely useful, and they tend to be error-prone, overused, and all that. In most cases, you will make the most of them by expanding short and concise abbreviations, which also better integrate into your workflow. I mean, writing an abbreviation should not break your thinking process. And over time, using this tool, and possibly others like it, will have a dramatic impact on your overall productivity, and surprisingly, not just when dealing with HTML and CSS. This is mainly due to the fact that the main benefit of using this tool is not necessarily producing more lines of code, but much more importantly, producing better quality code. And this is because it minimizes what I'd like to call micro disruptions in your flow of thought. For example, manually closing an HTML tag or indenting a tag into its surrounding context is, they are operations which take up some of your energy, which tire you. And this is why many editors try to assist these operations in various ways. So it allows you to spend more of your mental resources on the things that matter, like understanding and modeling your code, since you have to worry less about the unimportant stuff, things which slowly but surely waste your precious energy away. For example, sometimes I find that after a session of concentrated work, I am much better prepared to handle difficult problems than I used to be before using Emmet, simply because I spent less effort on dealing with trivialities during that day, and thus I'm less tired. Now, you may have noticed, and actually I think I mentioned, that I'm using Sublime Text as a source code editor. This happens to be my favorite editor, and it's also one of the editors which is officially supported by Emmet. Again, I did not show you how to install Emmet, since that varies with each editor or IDE, and you will find quite clear information on how to do this on the Emmet homepage, again, emmet.io. And as a side note, Emmet usually comes as a plugin or extension to be installed in your editor of choice. Obviously, other editors besides Sublime Text are supported officially, and there are also some which are unofficially supported. You should check again. You should check the Emmet homepage for that. And if it happens that your favorite editor is not supported, then you should check what is called the Zen Coding Project. I'm going to write this down as well so that you understand what I'm saying properly. Zen Coding Project. This is the precursor to Emmet, so you have you should have more success in finding something for your editor for Zen Coding, because it has been around for longer. So in the end, I encourage you to check it out, play with it, let it sink in, integrate it into your workflow, and in fact just start enjoying it. I really think you won't regret it. So this is it for this first episode of Milk Cookies Segfaults. For any suggestions or requests, please use the comments. Enjoy!